All right, welcome everybody to your 3:30 presentation here. For this session here, we have the construction project. Different perspectives, same goals. So some of you might be kind of looking at the initial slide as we have it up on the screen here and saying, you know, that looks a little familiar here. Well, it kind of is. So a couple of years ago, Chad Erickson with Strata Corporation presented at North Dakota Concrete Council's spring seminar, the concrete project, different perspectives, same goals. And as Wade Swenson, myself, and Larry Gangle were putting the programming together for our workforce track here, kind of having a conversation, and Wade brought up the fact, that was a really good presentation. We should have him have Chad come back in and give that presentation. And Larry goes, well, that's good, but that's a contractor telling everybody what the DOT and what consultant engineers think. Why don't we have, the DOT can speak for itself, right? So let's have a conversation between the contractor and DOT. And Larry goes, well, but the consultants, they can speak for themselves too, right? So kind of through that conversation here, we decided to put together a roundtable. And through that, we invited Chad Erickson. He's the Director of Concrete Operations for Strata Corporation. Jeremy McLaughlin, Vice President with the Vice President with Houston Engineering, and Nathan Haaland. He is the Assistant District Engineer for the Valley City District of the DOT. And you have myself, Brian Zuroff. I'm the Executive Director for North Dakota Concrete Council, moderating this roundtable here. So getting into the kind of the meat and potatoes of this, when we have a construction project, right, everybody has goals, whether it's the owner, the engineer, or the contractor, right? Well, the owner, they have the goals of wanting a quality project that is on time and on budget, right? Conversely, or I guess in parallel to, the engineer wants a project that is of quality, on time, on budget, as well as the contractor wants a project that is quality, on time, on budget, right? But how all of these different entities get to a quality project that's on time and on budget, while they are all the same goals, sometimes that route to a quality project that's on time and on budget looks maybe just a little bit different. So we have our panel here today with our roundtable to really kind of discuss some of the differences, some of the areas where everybody's kind of in agreement here, and ultimately at the end of this, we're going to hopefully get some audience interaction out of it as well. So walking through this, what are we covering? We're just going to cover the construction project from pre-design all the way through project closeout here. So hitting that design process, plan specifications, funding, quality control, and how kind of everybody likes to deal with the very elephant in the room of change orders and NOIs. And capping it all off here, again, we'll be leaving some time here at the end just for questions from the audience here from any of our panelists. So as you're listening, please, if you have questions, we do have time allotted at the very end for you to get the burning questions out of you here. So starting this off, Nathan, we're just going to kind of open with you here. Can you explain the process that the DOT or that DOT districts utilize to analyze your priorities, and how do these really flow into making the STIP?
Yeah, I guess we start out every year, we take a look at all the different highways and highway segments throughout our district, and we rank them from 1 to 100, and we set them that way, and we take into a lot of accounts from there. We review the packet we get from Planning and Asset Management that runs a DTIMS report and runs the pathway bands. We also talk to our maintenance side of it to see the shape of the roads for these various segments, and then we set the priorities every year for the next probably 10 years out there, really focusing on the immediate needs for the first 5 or 6 years, and then what we do looking forward to some of these other projects that are further down the line.
Awesome, thank you. We're going to kind of pick on you again here because we, get out of that pre-design process and we get into the design process, right? And when you're dealing with the design of a project, whether it's small or large, it's always really kind of important to understand who's calling the shots. So Nathan, if you could just kind of tell us what the process for selection of a consultant is from just kind of that high-level perspective.
Yeah, basically there's two types of consultants we hire. One is for preliminary engineering, one is for construction engineering. And some of the first questions we have right away are we able to staff it ourselves, or do we got to put it out and ask for a consultant for the work? A lot of the preliminary stuff is set up in Bismarck where they decide if they can staff it or not. Same with the districts, but we would be making the call for the district staff. And we basically put it on to an RFP, and then we ask the consultants to submit a proposal, and we do an interview with a selection committee, and from there they select the consultant.
Okay. Well, so consultants then get selected here. Jeremy, when Houston Engineering, when any of the other consultants get selected, and when you're designing a project, how much control does the DOT really give you? How much control over that design does a consultant have?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Before we jump into that, I just got to do a quick shout out. I ran into Phil Murdoff out there, and since we're going to be talking about construction, I think most of you probably know Phil, but I was telling him about how, when I was younger, I was just reminiscing about how I used to, get in one of those big tires, and my dad would push me down the hill. And for you all who know Phil, he's got a pretty good sense of humor. He just looks at me and said, "Yeah, I bet those were the good years." Nothing. All right. So back to the question at hand. When it comes down to designing a project, the bottom line is, we're professional engineers, and we have an obligation to design for the health, safety, and welfare of the motoring public, and really that's our primary obligation. But we also have a lot of variability based on the type of client that we're working for. You have very, sophisticated large clients like the North Dakota DOT, the Corps of Engineers, those types of clients that really know what they like to see in a project, but it's not a cookbook. It's really like these are the core things that we'd like to see. But you also have clients that may not have any idea of what goes into the process, but they know what they want the end product to look like. So there is a lot of flexibility, but it really depends on the client itself. And one of the primary things that we look at is, what's the objective of the project? Whether you're doing a grade separation or a very complex study or, widening shoulders on a gravel road, the amount of effort and the amount of variability that goes into those various projects is obviously widespread. So really sitting down with the client at the beginning of the process and saying, what's your goals and objectives? What do you want to accomplish with this project? That's really one of the things that we're really looking to. And at the end of the day, it comes down to, we have to be able to back up the project. When you put your stamp on that project, you have to be able to stand behind it and make sure that what you designed is something that you can stand behind, and not only with the client, but in a court of law. So those are all things that kind of go into it, but generally we do have a fair amount of flexibility.
Awesome. Well, obviously when we're talking about design process, we don't necessarily talk about contractors a whole lot, but kind of with that, Chad, can you kind of talk to, at what point as a concrete producer, as a contractor, do you want to get involved within a concrete project or within a construction project in general?
As a supplier and as a contractor, I think most of us are willing to help out even in the design process, pre-bid. If Jeremy or one of his guys have a question on what do we need for lane widths, or what can we do for what can we pave, what can our equipment do, what kind of mix design can we work on, we're more than willing to contact or touch base and share some of that information. As an industry, we want to see everybody succeed. The other thing is, when it comes to bidding projects, we want projects that are bid early. I think everybody does. I know we're kind of handicapped with the funding, and that becomes an issue. But when we can bid projects early, that gives myself, and contractors and suppliers time to line up logistics. You know, and I should also add, this year we ran into a situation where we had a consultant that was on a project that wasn't brought on until later in the process, and that actually delayed the pre-job for the project. So I think we're a big proponent of having the entire team together as soon as possible. You know, we want to see the DOT, the consultant, and the contractor all working together and start building that partnership. You know, one other thing that we kind of run into, we don't get involved necessarily in design, but we do get involved in specifications. Through the spec committee, we work with Justin Ramsey, and we talk about specifications with the DOT and try to make adjustments that works best so all of us can get these projects done efficiently.
Awesome, awesome, thank you. Well, jumping out of that design process here, well, maybe kind of staying in it a little bit, but really talking about that project plans, the project plans and specifications, what do we really need? So Nathan, when plans and specifications are developed, what is the owner DOT's desired outcome from those plans and specifications?
Yeah, I guess for the most part, we're looking for a set of plans or a set of specifications that are going to be reflective of the existing conditions that are out there and everything is accurate and correct, and to make sure that the project is constructible from the other side of it, to make sure that we can do it for what we want. And some of those things that we do, you know, are also with the specifications, and we generally run most of our specifications as either a method spec or a performance spec. And a method spec would be something you'd consider like a recipe, where if you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and that'll be the outcome that we would want or would expect based on past history. A performance-based specification is something that we spec out what we want at the very end, then give the contractor control over what his method is to get to that point.
Awesome. Awesome. So Jeremy, then from the consultant side of things, when plans and specifications are produced by a consultant, how do you differentiate between what items should be prescriptive and those that should be performance-based criteria?
Yeah, similar to what Nathan said, I mean, going to performance-based first, you know, generally what we talk about in our team is stay out of the means and methods. You know, we have contractors that have been doing this for a long time. They have a lot of expertise. Use that as a resource. Don't, you know, tell folks how to do their job. You know, we're more interested in the end product. You know, how they get there is typically up to them, as long as it's within reason. But there's really more of a minimum target that we need to uphold, and that's sometimes where the difficulty lies. You know, not all owners are created equal, not all engineers are created equal, not all contractors are created equal. So unfortunately, a lot of times a bad situation will end up with a new spec or a new requirement. And sometimes that can take away from what the end game is. So really what we try to do is focus on, you know, where do we want to be and how do we get there? And things like value engineering are something I consider a really valuable tool. It doesn't always get utilized, but you know, there's some times when a contractor may have a better idea how to build something, and let's take advantage of that. You know, I'll talk a little bit about how trying to do that earlier in the process is a better benefit than doing it at the end. But certainly it's something I want to look at. You know, and like I mentioned before, it's about the end product. You know, if we probably an extreme example is we look at a mile of concrete paving. You know, we're interested in durability and the performance of the roadway and the longevity, but not so much how it happens. You know, if a contractor wants to do a mile worth of concrete with a bull float, we're probably going to look at them like they're a little crazy. But if they can hit, you know, what we're looking for in the end in terms of ride and durability, you know, how much do we care? And I'll put a caveat that, you know, that's probably going to take them a long time, and I don't think anybody's going to want to see that road closed for that long. But my point is that, you know, if we hit that end target, then maybe it's not such a big deal. And I think the prescriptive part of it is like I mentioned earlier, is that there's some minimum thresholds that we have to meet. So we need to make sure that we're getting at least to that bar. But then beyond that, you know, it's really on the team to make sure that we can get as far as we can with the dollars that we have.
Awesome. Awesome, thanks. So Chad, when you do get these plans and specifications here, prior to providing a bid, what are you really looking at then from a contractor's point of view?
Well, we're looking for a clear picture. You know, we want the set of plans to give us an idea of exactly what we're looking at. A lot of times we'll see plans that have a gap in the traffic control or in the phasing of the project. There might be some gaps. So the better of a complete picture, the better it is for us. Quantities, that's accurate quantities is really a big item. You know, when a lot of us are bidding projects the night before the bid letting, we've got 10 to 20 different projects that we're putting numbers on, and when there's a lot of lump sum items, that becomes difficult because then we've got to take the time to do takeoffs, double check, triple check. It's always handy to have quantities. And then to go back to the performance versus the prescription spec, I think we'd much rather see the performance, just exactly what Jeremy was saying and Nathan was saying. Let's just give us a goal to hit, and we'll figure out how to get there. Too many times, not just in the DOT specifications, but in other specifications, we'll see a prescriptive spec and a performance spec, and that provides us an opportunity for a contradicting situation.
Yeah, it's always a little difficult. So, talking about project funding and bidding then, right? So, kind of getting out of that design side and getting into the money side of things here. Nathan, with federal aid being really a large part of most of project funding, how does that really dictate how your projects are bid out?
Yeah, I guess it starts out at the federal level where they pass the Transportation Acts. We're currently under the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in November of 2021. And this law states that it gives it authorizing legislation for transportation funding. The actual obligation is done annually through multiple appropriations process. And there can be multiple continuing resolutions done annually. Right now, the current resolutions are temporary spending bills, and these bills can vary in between days, weeks, and months at each time. So this can make some difficulties when putting different projects out to bid. Some of the funding types are in the alpha code of the project numbers.
Okay, awesome. So Jeremy, then, since a lot of the publicly funded projects in North Dakota are design bid build, in fact, I think we've had that discussion, you know, it's required by Century Code that a lot of the public projects are design bid build. Are there really lessons that we can be learned from the other types of bidding, whether it be CMCG, private-public partnership, and really how can those lessons be applied to that design bid build process?
Yeah, thanks. And as you mentioned, you know, it's fairly restrictive in what can be done on some of the North Dakota projects because of legislation. But, you know, we've been fortunate to be involved in a couple other contracting methods. I think for those that listened to the last presentation with the FM diversion, you know, an extremely large P3 project. We're also involved in on a team over in Moorhead, which is 11th Street grade separation, which is a CMGC project, which is construction management general contractor. So, you know, each different, and there's many other types, you know, as you mentioned, but each of those, you know, has an advantage based on the type of project you're going after, the time frame you have, those types of things. But one of the main draws or takeaways that I get from some of those other alternatives is integrating the contractor earlier in the design process, and especially on complex projects, there can be an extreme advantage to having that insight early in the project. And really, you know, I feel like we've tried to do this for many years at Houston. My background is structural, so done a lot of bridges, and I have a long history throughout the Troy Erickson over at IBI, Industrial Builders, You know, I've been working with him for over 20 years, and I can't even count the number of times where on a structural job or some other type of job, we'll call him up and say, hey, can this be built? Can this be done in this time frame? You know, what would work better? You know, how do you see this working better? And that insight is extremely valuable because, you know, we don't want to design things that the contractors struggle to build or more importantly, build cost into the project for the owner. We want to get the best use we can with those dollars. So that's something that you know, we really put a lot of emphasis on and find a lot of value. And I think Chad mentioned it earlier and you know, reinforced it here. Most contractors are more than willing to pick up the phone and listen if you've got questions on a job on, you know, how could this be built better? How could we do this better? And you see that on some of the larger projects where they'll you know, sit down and do some value engineering. But, you know, developing those relationships with contractors is extremely helpful and can really help get a project that's more efficient and more economical to build. So that's something that we've found tremendous value in.
Okay, awesome. So Chad, then taking that all into account, when does a contractor what does a contractor really have to take into account when he's providing a bid? So one thing I know that a lot of people have noticed is, you know, sometimes we get bids in, whether they be at the municipal level, the state level, all across kind of that spectrum of agency size, and sometimes those bids vary from one contractor to the next extremely. So again, kind of avoiding the actual dollar amount topic thing. What do you guys really have to take into account?
Well, I think all the contractors have to first look at a project and see how it's going to fit. And that goes from location, you know, how close are we to our resources. It also includes the timeline, you know, if you've got an early completion date. As contractors, we have to keep busy through the entire season. We want to keep our people busy. So we have to plug jobs into certain slots to where they fit, and we're trying to almost play Tetris with jobs, trying to make everything fit into a season. And so that's a lot of it, is we take a look at where that fits for our schedule and if we can make that work. If we can't, we may bid on it with additional overtime. Maybe we don't have the materials that are specified for the job, so we might have some inflated costs in that. So a lot of it is just where it fits in our schedule. Also, to add to what Nathan said earlier, he'd mentioned looking at jobs to see if they can be built. A lot of times that's what we're taking a look at. Can it be built with the resources that we have? One thing I guess I'd like to promote would be anytime you have less phasing and more flexible timeline, you're going to get more bidders. That's 100%.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we get into construction then, really we've got so many eyes that are on these projects, and one of those is really the quality control. Contractors have quality control. Engineers are typically on staff to perform some sort of level of quality control, and the DOT has their own staff that are out there performing quality control measures on these projects. So Nathan, really, when does the DOT want to be notified when there is an issue on a project?
I guess we would start out at the pre-job and go through the chain of command for both the DOT consultant and the contractor. So we kind of set those limits up at the pre-job right away. Generally, I'd want to be kept in the loop on anything from our standpoint, on just saying, hey, we had this issue, I did this, just to keep me in the loop. And then if it starts escalating beyond that, then us at the district, we would notify construction services or the designer if something had to be changed or whatever. But I think it's important to basically start at the bottom and work your way up. Great.
And then Jeremy, then as a consultant on DOT projects here during construction, what steps does a consultant take when determining what issues warrant correction during their observation of the construction process?
Yeah, I think the first part of this is identifying what the role is out in the field, because I think that's something that can often get young engineers in trouble out on the site and get in conflict with contractors. It's what is your role? In the engineer's role, I'd say typically or most times is not to approve a product in the field. It's to document, to be an observer, to notice what's going on. But it's not just black and white. I mean, we need to make sure that the plans and specs are being followed. That's a given. But it's not to just, if there's a problem that's noted, it's not to write it down in your diary and then go back and email or call the contractor 2 days later and say, hey, this is failing or this isn't going to work. That doesn't help anyone. It's really about being proactive versus reactive. And I think that anything you can discuss in real time, hey, we're seeing a potential issue here. This could be a problem. How are you, Mr. or Mrs. Contractor, going to handle this? And I think that relationship that you can establish early in the field, and we're fortunate we have some really good young engineers at Houston that are really good at this, but really developing that rapport with the contractors so that it's more of a teaming relationship, and not only that, but bringing the owner in as well when needed, but really making sure that you're on board and out in front of these things. And it's also important that, from a quality control standpoint, that you're not telling the contractor how to fix something if it is an issue. We can identify that it is an issue or say that this may or may not meet spec, but we don't want to be telling them this is how you should fix this, because that can get into some legal issues that can cause some real problems down the road. And really, you have certification approvals and you have materials testing, which is pretty black and white. It does or doesn't pass spec, or does or doesn't pass this test. But what do you do if it doesn't pass that test? Is the right answer always just to remove it and redo it? There's many times where you look at a project and say, well, if we're going to pull this out because it doesn't meet specification, we're going to do more damage or harm to the project, either in timeline or quality of the finished product, than actually just maybe accepting it with a deduct or working something out with the contractor to say, hey, this isn't what the owner paid for at the time of bid letting, but we can work some deduct out so that there's compensation back towards the owner, but we're all still coming out ahead in the end. So even though we have a pretty good process for what can and can't be approved, it's important to work through that process and find a result that's a win for everybody. That's not always possible. It sounds a little idealistic to say everybody's going to win. Sometimes people are going to feel like they're going to lose, and that's okay. But if you do that with the goal of a successful project, as we open this with, I think that's what's most important.
Yeah, and Chad, so really, how does a producer and a contractor view material testing? Because material testing is a huge part of these construction projects, regardless of the material. So,
before I get into that, I want to mention what Jeremy said makes a lot of sense, and I really, that's one of the stances that most contractors have. If we're dealing with somebody in the field, if you see something, say something. I know that sounds pretty simple, but if you see it, let's have a conversation about it immediately instead of getting an email 2 days later, because it might be a mistake, it might be something that was overlooked, but I think communication is real important. And along those lines, even communication, not necessarily just talking to a finisher saying, hey, there's an issue here, but talking to the project manager, talking to the superintendent. Let's make sure we're communicating. The more we talk, the better it ends up. But going back to your question about test results, as a supplier, test results are, they make or break the project for us. That determines our payment. So we want to make sure that they're done properly, just as everybody up here does as well. So I think when we have an issue, there again, we need to have some of the information given to us immediately so we can do companion testing. We can figure out if there's something wrong with the material that we're providing, then we can make some adjustments and try to work as a team to try to get within spec. If it is something on the testing that's not quite right, we can address that and make those changes, but we got to look at it as partners and trying to get this done together. One of the last points, I guess I have to put a plug in for the maturity system. I'm a big fan of using maturity. I'm not a fan of doing the preliminary work if we're not gonna use it. But I do think the maturity system is a way to skirt some of the problems that we have with the samples that are taken from cylinders and things like that. So I think we need to put more time into that.
Yeah, so then stepping out of quality control, we kind of walk into that change order NOI situation, right? So really, when things don't go as expected, what do we really need to be doing, right? Are things always as bad as they seem? Sometimes not. Sometimes they're worse than they look. So really, Nathan, does the DOT always anticipate change orders and NOIs on their contracts, and are they really viewed as a bad thing within the DOT, or are they just kind of something that's expected and something that we need to work through?
I wouldn't say they're a bad thing. Change orders, NOIs are a way to protect the contractor and protect us at the same time. Basically, a change order when something does come up, because not all plans are perfect. So if a change order does come up, it would be to the point to where we can agree with the contractor on whatever terms of the change order is. It's when we don't come to an agreement that we might need a third party to come in there and help figure out what the best avenue is.
Yeah. So then, Jeremy, when you're processing a change order or an NOI, really, what is the consultant's role in that, especially kind of that contracts between the DOT and the contractor most of the time with that, and the consultant can be pulled in as that third party. So how do you handle that as a party who's, or how do you handle really when a party doesn't necessarily agree or disagree?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and it can really vary a lot depending on who the client is. With different clients having different viewpoints on things, but as Nathan mentioned, there's no such thing as a perfect set of plans, and there's going to be errors at some point. There's going to be change orders, and that's just a fact of nature. So when those happen, it's really about how do we approach this, and what's the magnitude of it, what's the implications of the change, and how do we make sure that most importantly it's not a huge cost to increase to the project and doesn't delay things significantly, which can further add costs. We also got to look at and I think it's not going to surprise anybody, there's a stigma out there that when you have a change order it's going to be expensive because the contractor's got to make some changes and they have the ability to quote that. But so you got to look at what does it cost to bring in somebody new as well, right? There's a mobilization cost for that. So that's something that you got to look at. But in all reality, it's how do we keep this project moving on time? And the contractor may have to bring in outside resources or other things to make it happen. So there's a lot of things behind the scenes. But for me, the biggest thing is kind of the same theme as we've talked about before, is being proactive and being ahead of it the best you can. When it's a surprise near the 11th hour, everybody's going to lose because it's going to set the contractor back. It's going to be expensive, and it's going to be tough for the owner to swallow that pill because it came at the last minute. If you can be out in front of it early and say, hey, we foresee this issue coming, here's what we're going to do, here's what it's going to cost, and get everybody on the same page. Everybody might not be happy, but at least everybody understands where you're coming from.
Yeah, and Chad, so really what kind of risk, as Jeremy mentioned, what kind of risk do change orders carry for a contractor, and really what does that do for the price of that bid item?
Well, and Jeremy hit on a lot of them. There is a lot of risk. Usually we're talking a small quantity. There might be some remobilization, some additional traffic control, getting those guys mobilized over. So there's costs. It all depends on the change order that we're looking at. One thing that comes into play there is, as I said earlier, we're playing Tetris with our projects. We're trying to put them all into order. Now, anytime there's a change order that adds a bunch of extra work, that's pushing the next project down, and then the next one down. And you could see how that doesn't just impact that one project, but it impacts several projects down the line. And so that's where some of our expense comes in as well, and some of our cost. The key, I think Jeremy mentioned it, the key to it is let's have the conversation about a change order quickly, and let's get that thing processed before we mobilize away. If we can get something figured out quick, it's usually going to be at the savings to everybody. With respect to the NOI, we used to have some older folks in the construction industry that always said, well, we'll work that out at the end. We'll bend over a little bit this way backwards, and then they'll bend a little bit on that, and we'll make it work in the end. And from a legal standpoint, that just isn't the case. And it's not, an NOI isn't intended to be a slap in the face or anything like that. It's basically just to put everybody on notice that, hey, we've got an issue here, and we should discuss this, so that all three parties, the owner, the engineer, and the contractor, are all discussing it, and we're not hitting somebody blindsided at the end of a project.
Yeah, great. Well, speaking to the end of the project, so kind of hopping into that project completion, project closeout, you get to that point where it's like, oh, this project's finally over, right? We made it through all the design, made it through all the construction, change order, NOIs, it's done. But when is it really considered done? So Nathan, can you kind of touch on that a little bit, just from an owner's perspective, DOT perspective, of when a project is complete, when do you guys really consider it complete?
Well, once all the final documents are pulled in from the project, final estimate is cut, everybody's done their reviews and checks from the engineer to the district to the central office, and everything's in line, we would consider that would be the time when we would take acceptance of the project. And then it's basically like hitting a reset button for us out taking a look at it. It would start the priority process all over again. We would have to look at, crack sealing, repairs, and whatnot, and looking at the next project that's going to be 3 years to 10 years down the road that we start planning for at that time.
Okay. So then, Jeremy, after construction is complete, what's typically required of the consultant to finalize that project, and when is it really done in your eyes?
Yeah, and I think it's, what do you consider complete? There's final, and then there's substantially complete, and I know the North Dakota DOT has a pretty good process for that, but other clients have different viewpoints on it. And I think the thing that we got to keep in mind is functional use, and our biggest critics are always the public, right? When the roads are closed down, or there's construction zones and cones out everywhere, people notice that, and especially if nobody's working, right? They get upset, and very quickly, without understanding why that may be. We may have to do some critical work yet, and that's why there's nothing happening, and we can't get that done for another week or two, whatever. There's a million different circumstances, but really trying to get the functional use of that road, bridge, whatever it is, up and running as soon as possible. To me, that's end game number one. Some of the other things can wait. If we can't seed it right away, or do some bio roll replacements or something. Are we holding up the entire project for something that maybe doesn't matter in terms of the functional use? And I think we have to take that into account, not only in finalizing the project, but the amount of retainage. We've had numerous projects where, maybe you only have to do the seeding, but you might not be able to get that seeder back out there. So you have to have enough retainage to bring somebody else in to do that job to finalize the project. But on the flip side of that, you have to be fair. Are we holding back 20% of a project for 2% of the work? We need to make sure that money gets in the hands of the contractors, but we still have enough to get that project finalized. So really, to me, it kind of all boils down to being fair, but always having that backdrop of, we got to get this project open to the public as soon as we can safely. And with that in mind, I think most people are probably in agreement with that.
Great. So Chad, really as a contractor, just from your perspective, the region we live in, North Dakota, we're seeing it right now. we had 65 degrees outside here last week, and now we're in the middle of a slight snowstorm, and it's March, right? So there's a lot of different components, weather, timing, everything, and we do typically have very stringent completion dates, whether it's with DOT projects or municipal projects or even private projects. So, you know, are these stringent completion dates, are they favorable for a contractor, or is winter construction maybe becoming more of a reality for us?
Well, and I'm starting to get pretty redundant here, but like I said, our schedule is built around different projects and trying to fit them in. You know, we'd much rather, as contractors, much rather see a completion date at the end of the season, and then we can figure out where to plug it in. That's not necessarily going to mean the project's going to take the entire summer to complete. It just means we've got the ability to shift around a little bit. And actually, the DOT does a really nice job at doing that and keeping that window open. And especially with some of the products that we have out there, you know, with the Evotherm on the asphalt, you know, we've got some different things on the concrete end that we can use. You know, we can build projects a little more into the colder weather, so we're a little more, that window can be a little wider open if we need to, and I think the DOTs recognize that and started moving the completion dates a little bit as well. Wanted to add to that, just build off of what Jeremy had said about, you know, there's a point where we all want to get the road open, and after the road is open, there used to be an issue with finalizing the project and that taking a while, but I tell you what, Phil Murdoff has been working on that, and he's done a great job at expediting it, and I've noticed that our finaling projects is coming together a lot faster, and I mean, we still have to keep working on that because we don't want to have them sitting out there for 2-3 years or anything like that, but like I said, the DOT's been doing a much better job with that end of things. But also, Jeremy had mentioned on as far as holding retainage and how much work there was and some of those items. That becomes a critical issue at times. Sometimes we see a lot of dollars being held, and don't forget the engineer and the owner have a performance bond that they can pull if they need to try to get us to complete a project. But usually, I mean, this is, at least for most of the contractors that are here, this is our home. We're not going anywhere, and we want to, going back to your first slide, we want to make sure a project's done on time and on budget and quality.
Yeah, great. Well, and that's one thing that I've noticed just kind of throughout. Nathan's mentioned it, Jeremy's mentioned it, Chad's mentioned it, is really communication, right? So the one thing that I think we all need to kind of take away from, it doesn't matter what part of the project we're in, it doesn't matter who the conversation's necessarily between, but it's really that effective communication is really the best way to solve all of our problems. Can't be afraid to bring an issue up, and we can't be afraid to discuss it and see that all the way through to a successful resolution. So with this here, before we hop into audience Q&A, I just want to give each one of you about 30 seconds here for some closing discussion points, comments, anything you guys want to say?
I've got one thing. I hit on it earlier, I'll hit on it again. Less phasing, more flexible timelines. You'll get more bids.
I guess I would add something too, when we're out running projects, working with the contractors on how important it is to generate an estimate at least every other week to make sure that they are getting paid just like we are getting paid. We wouldn't let them or let anybody give us our payday 3 weeks late, but just staying on top of that, I think, is very important.
Appreciate that.
Anything, Jeremy?
I'm going to just mention in my closing, I'm going to pose a question to Chad because it may, others may have the same question I do, but we had a project we did locally in the Fargo area where we had, trouble getting in bids. It was a very complex job. And what we ended up doing was stretching out the overall construction schedule from, 1 year to 2, but then we put a restriction in there that, let's say, a bridge has to be done within X window of that 2-year time frame. does that increase the appeal of a project to you as a contractor to have a little bit more flexibility to build things in?
Absolutely, yeah. Because then, like we said, we can shift it around, and a lot of the issue we run into, especially on some of the structures, is getting materials as well. So, yep, that gives us some time for logistics and things like that.
And I know there's issues with funding and, after spending it next year from the owner's perspective. I know all that stuff too, but I think that's something that, sometimes a little more flexibility in the schedule, it seems to increase the amount of bids that we get as well.
Yeah, great. Well, with that here, we do have about 5 minutes left for audience question and answer session here. So while we got these guys in a hot seat, if anybody's got a burning question that they'd like to point at Nathan, at Jeremy, or at Chad, please feel free.
Thank you all for this. I talked to our estimators. I work for a contractor. Before the bid time and date, that's the time. That's really our only chance to get it right. And so, as a contractor, we need to start looking at the plans and specs earlier and try to eliminate some of the late questions in the process. But that being said, I do appreciate that, like the North Dakota DOT will address questions and answers even the day before the bid. I don't like it if municipalities say cuts off questions a few days before the bid, because we procrastinate, and then there's unknowns, and then there's potential for conflict after the bid. If we can just call and say, hey, it's kind of unclear whether wrap's allowed here. Can you just write in the plan notes or an addendum, we don't want wrap, or wrap's okay? In the plan notes, in an addendum, that certainly governs over vague things in the plan. We certainly understand it's impossible to get a large set of plans and specs perfect, but we like those governing addendum, bid items, plan notes that are very specific and answer all the questions for us, because then we know for sure what's going on in the bid, and there's no unknowns, there's nothing to maybe fight over as early as like the pre-job conference. But yeah, I guess my main point is we like when we're still allowed to ask questions late in the process, maybe even a day or two before the bid, just to make sure we're on the same page as you on everything for our customer.
Great. Anybody else?
Can I just add to what?
Yeah,
what Greg
absolutely,
said?
Chad. Absolutely.
When Greg said when there's unknowns when we're bidding, I think all contractors, we have to price those, especially experienced contractors, we have to price those to cover worst case scenarios, so it ends up costing taxpayers and everyone else additional money. So yeah, I completely agree with what Greg said.
I think just on the flip side of that, I think it's also beneficial to look at the plans earlier if you can on our side, because one of the issues we get into, and I don't want to speak for the DOT, but certainly from a consultant side, is that if we get questions late and if there is a change, trying to get addendums out and those types of things at the 11th hour can be very, very challenging and add a lot of risk. And that's, I think, why there is a cutoff period, is just because of that process has to be followed. So, I certainly understand that, clarification is important and things we can do, but we also got to be a little careful just from the process standpoint.
And just to bounce off of that, a lot of the times it may not be a question that the general contractor, the prime contractor has, but one of the subcontractors or even a second tier subcontractor, and we normally don't get those quotes until the night before, so that's where a lot of that comes in, just giving you a heads up. But yeah, I agree, we're all guilty of it. We need to look at those plans more often, or earlier.
Yeah, perfect.
And I can jump in after that. I know when we're trying to design a project, no matter what level it is, contractor A might do it this way, contractor B might do it this way, and we're trying to incorporate something that will fit everybody's process.
All right, we got about 1 minute left. Anybody have one last question? All right, not seeing much anything. Let's give these gentlemen a big round of applause.